Welcome to Reflection for the fourth and final Sunday of the Advent season. Our first reading comes from Micah chapter 5. The sponsorial psalm is 80. Second reading is from Hebrews chapter 10. Our gospel from 1 of Luke. I'm a little tired. Sorry, people. As we mentioned the last few weeks, inserting the same reflection for the weekday Advent reflections for this one. It has been pointed out to me post sending a few of these out, and this being the final one, that this will actually come out before the weekday reflection. Sorry, I wasn't thinking. And so, unless you want extra penance on Sunday, you don't need to rewatch that one. Hope you have a wonderful day. God bless. So today, finally, our readings are starting to focus on the birth of Jesus in a little bit more intentional way, now that Christmas is only a few days away. Our first reading comes from Micah, and this again is the promise of that Jesus is going to come. Bethlehem, Ephrathah, you are too small to be among the clans of Judah. From you shall come forth one who is to be ruler in Israel. God chooses the small, broke, weak, most inferior of the people or nations or places to do his work so that we can tell that it is God. If you get this great charismatic person and they're just doing all these good things, you might assume that it's just their natural gifts, or they themselves might assume it's their natural gifts. But if you take somebody who's a nobody, God works through them, that shows his power and his authority. This is why I say, if anything good ever comes from out, these reflections are good at all for you, know that it is God doing the work. If they're bad, that's my fault. That's what I would normally produce without the Holy Spirit. Hopefully, you've been reading our bulletin letters, or my bulletin letters, the last few weeks. During this Advent season, I wanted to focus on different themes that we see in Luke's gospel, because he gives us the Christmas narrative in the most detail, where he also lays out for us that Jesus, when he is born, is pointing to the cross. And so here, Bethlehem means house of bread. And so this is one of those moments that when I realized, or when it hit me when I was in college learning scripture for the first time really in life, even though I'd learned it in uh, school before, when I really learned it for the first time, it just sort of blew my mind away, changed my heart. That from the moment of his birth, Jesus doesn't just settle for taking on our humanity, which is already infinitely lowering himself from his current state, God, into our human condition. He does so in the most simple way possible. But first, think of the smallest, most insignificant thing in all of creation. Gnat, some weird bug that lives underground that nobody's even seen yet. Whatever it might be. The distance between me or you and that thing is infinitely less, or we're infinitely closer to each other than God is to us until Jesus takes on flesh. It's a very profound thing that we ought to realize. So not only does he just take on our condition, he does so in the most humble of ways. We know that Mary and Joseph are on the poorer side, probably lower middle class, sort of use our language today, maybe even a little bit lower. We see that when they do the presentation, they take 2 turtle doves instead of a bigger sacrifice. They use the exemption for those who do not have wealth, that don't have money. He's born into a small town. His father is a tekton. Oftentimes we translate as a carpenter, but it's somebody who worked with their hands, and knowing the geography at the time and not a lot of trees, a lot of what he probably did was stone masonry, although would have worked with wood at least a little bit. Somehow, fashioning things takes, even today, what we might see as an inferior job, at least some people might, although you read John Paul II, he reminds us that that work is very valuable, very beautiful. It's a share in God's creative act, but we can have a natural tendency sometimes to think a little bit less, especially if it's with Joseph not very well providing for the family, taking them up to a higher level. Then Jesus, of course, surrounds himself with guys that work the night shift, fishermen, and not just fishermen, and again, night shift people, second shift people, bad fishermen. They have a tendency not to catch anything unless Jesus works a miracle. Whenever they have a big catch, they're like, oh no, that's God. And they do something crazy because they're probably not good in general. Obviously providing some sort of survival for themselves, but nothing fantastic. Right, but all this humility, And we want to just sort of enter into all those different aspects. The Bethlehem house of bread. He's wrapped in swaddling clothes, tightly wrapped, pointing to when he's going to be put into a cave at the end of his life when he is killed. Born in a cave, he's put into a feeding trough, a manger, which of course points to a meal. I've seen theologians go back and forth, but this seemed to be a very common practice at the time. And the fact that it's mentioned means that Luke is really trying to draw attention to it. So it'd be kind of like saying, my brother took his baby and they went to the store. You would assume they put the kid in a car seat to get from the house to the store. I don't tell you that part of the story because it's given. That's what would have been the case for like the manger. Just there. So Luke's pointing out this fact. Jesus from the very beginning is saying, I'm going to die for you. I'm going to give my life for you. And just that great love that from the very beginning, he says, I love you so much, I'm going to sacrifice everything. With that theme, we're told he shall stand firm and shepherd his flock by the strength of the Lord. The idea of the good shepherd that will protect us, defend us, go after the lost sheep. And what does he do in the entirety of his public ministry? He's always going after people. He's always looking for the next person. And that's something we want to remember in our own life. Every time that God makes a move towards us, we move towards God, the first move is always God towards us. The second is towards him. And so if you've been through any sort of conversion, the first move was God moving towards you, inviting you to come to him. And then you responded. We see it physically at every Mass. When we receive communion, what is the first move? Myself and the deacons, we move to you. God comes to you through us, and then you come to him. That's how it works in the spiritual life all the time. You show up to prayer. You show up to watch this video. God was calling you, and you respond. Pray with that depth and that simplicity of his life and his love for you. So the Old Testament is known to have a lot of sacrifice. What the temple was for, all religions have it. There's something that's hardwired in us we need to sacrifice to live in a sin-sick world. Bishop Barron says, in a sin-sick world, there is no love without sacrifice. Well, that's not true. What is one time you've done a loving thing that didn't have some element of sacrifice? Now, it may have been a willing sacrifice. My girlfriend, hypothetically here, wants to go see a movie that I don't want to see. An act of love is I'm going to go see that movie. My friend wants to go to a restaurant I don't care to go to. I'm going to sacrifice for them. Right? And there might be times where things line up and it's not as big of a deal. Husband and wife come together. I'm forsaking every other possibility in this world. Every other woman, every other man, not going to be there. You. I'm going to sacrifice myself for you, for the kids, for whatever. Right? And all love requires some element of sacrifice. And so because of that, to get us ready for this, because in the Old Testament, God is slowly building up to the revelation of Jesus. He has to get our hearts and our minds and our souls ready to receive him. That we have these Old Testament sacrifices. But then we're told by the letter to Hebrews, which is an ancient homily, maybe not written by Paul. When Christ came into the world, he said, sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you prepared for me. And holocaust and sin offerings you took no delight. And I said, as it is written of me in the scroll, behold, I come to do your will, O God. The scroll is also going to point to last will and testament. It's going to point towards death. And so we've got this idea that Jesus came to offer the one last sacrifice, which Hebrews does talk about. We heard that at the end of our last set of readings, liturgical year. We're going through B, getting ready to move into C. Offered one sacrifice for all, which now echoes through all of eternity. So what does he want now? Our hearts. He wants us to conform to his will. The sacrifice he wants is not external, but internal. He wants us not to begrudgingly go and do the things. He doesn't want us begrudgingly going to Mass. He wants us to long for Mass, which is still a sacrifice. Even if we have the most perfect longing, we're still sacrificing anything else we could do on Sunday morning or Saturday evening. We're coming to give him that worship, to let him sanctify us. Definitely something to pray with. Because, of course, that gesture, that move, that transition begins at Christmas and what we celebrate again in just a few days. And then our gospel, Luke 1. This is the visitation. We reflected on this earlier in our Advent season, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. But Mary again travels in haste, moves quickly to go serve. She receives Christ and immediately starts loving like him. And then Elizabeth says something very beautiful at the end of this. We have, of course, John the Baptist weeping for joy in her womb. We talk about that, how it relates to David. Blessed are you who believe that what was spoken to you by the Lord would be fulfilled. And just imagine this in the humanity of what would have happened. So remember, Zechariah in the temple has his encounter with the angel. He says you're going to have a kid, and he doubts it. He says, how's that even possible? And because he has doubt, he's made mute. And so he's probably communicated somehow to his wife, to Elizabeth, that that's what happened. And so the fact that Mary is there, able to speak, is going to have some sort of expression that she was able to trust, that she received the message fully. Now, she asks a question of, how is this possible? Not, are you kidding me? It's like, explain to me what you're going to do, not, I doubt that you can do it. Very different questions. We can always ask God to explain what's going on or what are you trying to show me. That's a good thing. Now, he may not do it or may not fully do it. That's okay. It's his prerogative. But just imagine that trust that Elizabeth is able to see right there, and the joy that she would have, that Mary was able to trust, and all the happiness that two women who were expecting, especially two that were not expecting to expect at this point in their life, because Elizabeth had grown past the normal time for children, and Eve, or Mary, the new Eve, made a promise of virginity. We talked about earlier in our Advent season. Some very beautiful things. Just maybe encourage you, maybe at some point in the next few days or get into our Christmas season, to slowly sit with some of these things and maybe let the Spirit guide what's going on. It's beautiful, powerful things to help us, I think, get into the weight and the gravity of what Christmas is all about. Yep.